Our next speaker is Diz Swift, who's going to be talking about actions that are being done in Berkeley. And as she gets up to the podium, I'll say that there are many projects that are happening in your communities that may or may not be focused on sea level rise. But as Bruce just described, you can introduce the consideration of those concerns in those projects. And so Diz is going to talk a little bit about some of the work that she's doing in Berkeley.
Thank you. And thanks to the League, especially the Bay Area League, for coordinating this whole thing with all of the other leagues. Thank you very much. I have a background in geology. I have a PhD in geology, so I have a geologic bent on this, as well as being a public works commissioner. I appreciate the work that is being done, particularly at the state and the regional level, because the city can't do anything without support from the state and the region, because the Pacific Ocean will impact us all. Berkeley alone can't do anything. How high is the sea level going to rise? Bruce just gave us a very nice selection of very precise looking data about how high the sea level will rise. In fact, in geology, we don't know how fast and we don't know how far. We know ultimately, in a period of centuries, that it will rise hundreds of feet, as in 200 plus. But how soon will that happen, and how much will that happen? The best data that we have right now is by the Environmental Research Letters, I'll go over here, report that 95% probability that sea level will rise less than 1.8 meters. That's about 6 feet by 2100. But the major impact of sea level rise is from melting of land glaciers, and those are mostly in Greenland and the Western Antarctic ice sheet. The Western Antarctic ice sheet recently in the Amundsen Sea sector has come ungrounded, and NOAA calls it unstoppable. These scientists, Jevrev and et al., said, well, that's true unless the West Antarctic ice sheet becomes ungrounded. So the West Antarctic ice sheet alone will add a lot to sea level, on the order of 20 feet. But the thing is, it will come off a lot faster than Greenland will, because it's kind of like a frozen Hawaii. It's islands and sea with ice all the way down to the seafloor. But now it's become ungrounded, and so it just keeps coming off. So prudent. Now, ice of that magnitude, it's huge amounts of ice, take a long time to melt, because they're sitting there as ice, and the temperature will remain at 0 C while there's still ice there, 0 centigrade. So what do you do for planning? A prudent range for planning is 1 to 3 meters. That's 3.5 to 10 feet by 2100. 10 feet is 1 story. So that's kind of a lot. So precision is great for planning, but you have to keep in mind that not only will we get to 3 meters eventually, whether it's 2100 or not, we'll get a lot higher than that. It's without question. So how high is high? We'll know a lot more about that as we study it. The geologic community, especially the glaciologists, are working very hard to understand how the glaciers will melt and how much sea level will rise and where. A point about sea level that Bruce made very well is that the storm surges are major in how they affect development near the ocean. In Florida, a FEMA study was done that said 1 foot of sea level rise will increase damage by 30 to 40% in a dollar sense. So 1 foot. Now that's going to happen very soon, as much as we know now, probably by 2030. So what does that look like in Berkeley? These are not the precision sea level rise maps that Bruce was showing. But they give you a general picture. So this is Berkeley. We're right on the bay, for those of you who don't know us. Interstate 80, 580-80 comes right through here. If we go up by 1 meter, that's 3.3 feet, the things, that are impacted, don't worry, are primarily Aquatic Park, which is a jewel of a park in Berkeley, but it will become much more, it's already brackish, and it will become much more brackish. And actually is, unless we make a dike out of the freeway also is going to be covered, and so Aquatic Park is just part of the bay. Other areas, a lot of the lowlands down by the marina are impacted, but Golden Gate Fields is impacted at 1 meter. So that's almost a guarantee that we'll see. 2 meters, the transfer station, which is the waste, where we handle all of our waste in Berkeley, is being impinged upon. And at 3 meters, the 4th Street Shopping District is impinged upon. And that's a real tragedy. Imagine no Bettys, I don't know. But I want you to look at whether it's 2 meters or 3, either way, the interstate is flooded. Now, we cannot put dikes around the entire interstate system in the Bay Area. It's just prohibitive. So the other thing is we have rail that is just inboard from this, freight and Amtrak. So that's a big cost. And as Councilmember Gordon said, our waste drains down the hills, goes to a gathering line along the bay. Those are all big costs, but it's as we talked about co-benefits, we can make this place better. So I want you to think a minute, for this from a public works perspective. We're going to move this freeway. Well, we just move it up here. Well, there's lots of nice neighborhoods and interesting people and dynamics up there. And one of the things that we are thinking about is, why are we thinking that everything has to stay the same? With cars, the only way to get around. Yesterday I was in Manhattan. Just for fun, I counted the personal cars. Almost none. There were trucks, there were cabs. Everybody goes by subway or bus and walks. And it's a huge city. We also talked about complete streets. And that was mentioned earlier as well, but complete streets beyond just being used for not just cars and not just buses and not just vehicles that we are thinking now as fossil fuel driven. It could be electric, but there's many other ways we could go. The last thing, and that complete streets, by the way, is for everyone that uses a street, pedestrians, disabled, bikes, tricycles, strollers. Everybody is safe, and it's a good way to go for everyone. But what about public gathering places and partners and so on? So complete streets is something that we want to look at. Also cars, we're talking about parking, the need for parking. Well, maybe we won't even have cars, or the cars will be very different. And parking may or may not be something we need. So when you look at a public works perspective, you're looking decades to even a century ahead. And we need to really think of those things. So what's impacted are rail and freeways and the waste permit and all of that infrastructure. We're relying mostly on the state and region for, because it's all linking municipalities. Planning and permitting. What about, are we going to permit people to build down right on the bay anymore? And when do we stop doing that? So also insurance and liability. Who is liable? So on flood mitigation, if you look at Berkeley, oops, don't worry, I can handle this. If you do a cross-section from the bay to the right, it's up into the Berkeley Hills. If you do a cross-section, geologists have to do cross-sections. It looks like this. So it's high runoff in the hills, and the flood threat is in the flatlands. So we're trying to keep the flood threat down in the flatlands. So mitigation is in the middle part. And what does that, and that means slowing the water down and not letting it run down as fast into the lowlands. That's pretty much all we can do there. So these are 3 things that we are doing now. There's a bioretention cell on the left, a bioswale in the middle, and permeable pavement on the right. All of them slow the runoff, so you don't have as much flooding. But it also cleans and filters the runoff, and it looks really pretty. So that's some of the co-benefits. And then the last slide is the types of catchments that we have are cisterns and catchment basins that will allow percolation and is used for irrigation later and fire control. So one thing you need to remember is that we're going to know a lot more about how far the sea will rise and how fast soon, within decades. So jumping to panic mode is not really prudent, but we do have to start thinking about it now because we move so slowly. So we're looking at investments way out in the future, and so we need to be thinking now. Thank you very much.